In today's program, Carmen Smith is going to talk with us about adoption, and particularly cross-racial adoption, and the challenges faced by adoptees, their families, and their communities. Carmen has impressive credentials. She's currently a doctoral candidate in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Antioch University, New England. She's already a certified rehabilitation counselor. She's working to become an approved supervisor with the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Carmen is an adoption competent counselor whose specialties include adoption and foster care, also vocational assessments and rehab counseling. She has studied the intersection of mental illness, substance abuse, social injustice, and how the loss of cultural identity relates to the mental health of minorities. Carmen plans to use her experience to effect change in the laws and policies that affect families and underrepresented populations. So we're going to hear some really interesting information here today. Please welcome Carmen.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm a mover. Let me know if it affects the sound or if it affects how you're engaging with the program, and I will do my best to stay stationary. Run back and forth. So before we begin, does everyone have something to write with? And if not, may I have my helpers grab the pens and just make sure everybody has something to write with. You do not need paper, but you do need something to write with. And if you don't, please raise your hands. And while they're handing out the pens, I also wanted to do a public service announcement that we have chosen to record this session today. And typically when we're engaged in topics around our families and maybe the services in the area, that we name our children or we name the services. And I always like to be aware and conscious of that, especially when there's any type of video recording going on. The therapist in me wants to do the best to maintain confidentiality, while also understanding that I can't protect anything beyond this space of what we talk about. So I invite sharing, I definitely invite questions, and I like to just say that for those of us that leave this place, that you take the knowledge with you and leave the details here. We have a small community, and the adoptive community is small as well, even across the United States. So if you've learned something, it's touched you, and you want to take it and spread that knowledge elsewhere, please engage in conversations and spread that knowledge. And maybe leave the details if you heard a name or a school or anything like that, so that we can at least try to offer some anonymity for other people. And again, I do invite you to ask questions. And if you need to speak with me privately about something, I will be available after. And during the break, I think we might have a break. So does everybody have a pen? Okay. Let's start with this side of the room. I would like you to get up and grab a piece of that brown paper. Don't be afraid to tear. It's meant to be torn. And also, while they're all grabbing a piece of the paper, for this side of the room, it will be your turn to also go up. And if there aren't any more sheets available or any more of the poster available, then that's okay, because we're going to be passing things around. So don't be afraid or think you're not going to be able to participate if you don't have one. Oh, they're being generous. Taking nice small pieces. So I will need you all to tear that up. I want you, do not be shy. Do not be afraid to take a big piece. And I appreciate your patience as we were having some technical difficulties up here. We had it set up and then the colors were just going all wonky. But I think we've got it. And then just let me know if messages start popping up on the screen. So like I said, don't be afraid to take big pieces. We want all of that brown paper gone. So for those of you who are just joining, my name is Carmen Smith. I'm here to talk to you today about grief. Grief throughout the lifespan of an adopted population and with the children that are yours and that I help serve and the families that we serve. And really just shifting the lens and recognizing that these are grieving children, grieving individuals. And when we look at their behaviors from a lens of grief, things start to make sense. We gain some clarity, not only in understanding the behavior, but in learning how to help. Okay, so now that everybody has a piece, I would like you to own it in some way. Whether that's writing your name, drawing a picture, maybe writing your favorite number, but just somewhere on the paper, it doesn't matter where, go ahead and take ownership of that piece. This is your piece. One thing. One thing. Now, as you're thinking about that and you are all writing, I want you to know that this piece, this is a piece that you are responsible for until I ask you to change. And change comes with life circumstances, right? Maybe for sometimes the children that are in foster care, the foster placement falls through, or a change in counselor or therapist, a change in their school environment, if some of them have had to move across townships or even for some into completely different cities. So this shifting, this ownership that you have in this shifting is to acknowledge all of that change. And I think it'll start to become clear as we move along. Also, how many parents do I have? Okay. Okay. How many parents of transracially adopted children? Okay. What ethnicities are we looking at here? If you want to just go ahead and...
Not clear, but I think biracial black.
Biracial black.
Indian and Puerto Rican.
Indian, Puerto Rican.
Cambodian.
Cambodian.
Mexican.
Mexican.
Latino.
Latino. Okay. And Mexican? Okay. Do I have any helping professionals in the audience as well? So I'm asking like therapists, social workers, teachers, school counselors. Okay. Okay, good. I just like to make sure that the languaging that we're using, that we've got a shared understanding and meaning with some of the things. So please invite me to stop if I start using something that does not fit within what you have been using for definitions or things. So adoption, happy event, right? For the child, for the family. What tends to happen is that we forget about the loss that is inherent in adoption, and that this loss needs to be mourned. It's flipping that coin. This is celebrations. We celebrate in the court, we celebrate at home, we celebrate with our families, and sometimes there isn't a space given for acknowledging that in order for this beautiful event to happen, a loss needed to occur. So today we're going to talk about this loss, this primal wound and grief. We'll be looking at the ghost kingdom. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that. And grief through the ages, the resiliency and recovery, and some resources at the end. So as we go through the lifespan, it'll seem very, very structured, same format throughout. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to increase your understanding on the intersectionality of human development and adoption and grief, and know that we're looking at this multifaceted situation. Also identify ways to reduce the suffering throughout the developmental years. So for parents, things that you can do to help, and for helping professionals, things that we can do to help the parents. And again, exploring techniques on how to foster resiliency and recovery. I think we're all on the same page of trying to raise whole, healthy adults. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can throughout their years to help them with that. So this primal wound, this first wound, this first separation from the birth mother, and this wound can also affect their sense of self, and it manifests in a sense of loss, basic mistrust, anxiety, and depression. So the awareness can be conscious or unconscious. However, what we know is that the resulting separation does connect with this sense of choice, that there was a choice made by the mother. How we talk about and address that choice with these children is important. So the ghost kingdom. This is the place where all of the imagined or what could have been personalities reside. For the child in the ghost kingdom, this child brings with them the thought of their mother, the mother that they do not know, their first mother, or as some refer to them, the birth mother, that they may not have a connection with. This child also carries with them a ghost sibling. Now, this could be if the parents may have been trying for their own child, the biological child, and were not able to conceive, or if they had conceived and had lost that child and have now adopted another child. But this child has these surrounding ideas of what would have been, what would it have been like, what would they have looked like. And when they start to fall into that realm of pondering, this metaphysical space within their heads where they imagine and where they go, is where they think about things like that. For the adoptive mother in the ghost kingdom, it's about the child that she does not have. And the fact that she is a mother, though society does not refer to her as a mother because she doesn't have her child with her, yet she has given birth to a child. She is accompanied by the ghosts of the adoptive parents that she may or may not know, but also wondering, what are they like? How are they raising the child? And would they ever look or support the search later on? All of those wonderings are there. For the adoptive parents, it's the golden child or the dream of the child that they would have, what it would have looked like, what that experience would look like. And sometimes that's activities that they would do together that you find your adopted child is not interested in those activities. But you as the parent were like, I'm gonna do this, we're gonna go shopping, we're gonna go hunting, we're gonna go do all of skiing. And then your adopted child's like, I don't wanna ski. It's not my thing. So there's a loss in that, because as individuals who have built up what would have been and what it looks like, acknowledging that loss and that perspective resides in the ghost kingdom as well. So what we've noticed, and this was Dr. Elizabeth Lifton named the ghost kingdom, is this is the place when we find our children daydreaming, or maybe wondering and questioning what their first family looks like, how they behave. This is the place that they go. So for those of us that are wanting to join our children in this space, we want to help them dismantle the ghosts. We want to take away the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the unknown, and offer as many details as possible. And also create a safe space to talk about that, and talk about that with them in such a way that they can start to build their story and create their sense of self and their identity. So for those of us who may be experiencing some acting out behaviors, I don't know ages, I didn't do ages for children, but if there are some acting out behaviors, it is important that we don't rush to pathologize these behaviors and to rush with diagnosing for those of us in the helping profession, And when we shift our lens and we look at it from grief, we see that these are legitimate mourners and that they're demonstrating fear, sadness, and anger. And we need to understand that. Yes.
I want to ask you if people who have adopted Caucasian children, I'm feeling torn because I adopted a little boy, my wife and I, who's Caucasian, and everything you're saying makes complete sense in terms of our experience as a family. But I'm just wondering, because you didn't ask, are there people who have adopted children, Caucasian children, if you see that as different in how you're explaining things or not different?
So thank you for that. And when I asked the ethnicities of your children, I would think that Caucasian would fall in that, because society has a tendency to lump Caucasian in, right, based on skin color. However, there are different ethnicities within a white skin color. There are Italians, there are Spanish, right? These, in the way that society has constructed it, and sometimes it's very binary when it comes to skin color, like people of color and white people. White people have ethnic origins as well. And there are white families that have and honor their history and their ethnic origins. So whether they're from Ireland or Scotland, right? So do you know or have ethnic practices that you would like to let us know? Or, you know, you've acknowledged that you adopted a Caucasian child. Does that fit?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I think what I want everyone to consider, though, is that gap in acknowledging, right, that even when we're asking for ethnic identities, when I'm asking you for what are the ethnicities of your child, that is a time for you to advocate, speak up and say, yes, I adopted a Caucasian child, or your child could be Irish. Your child could be Scottish, or anything like that. So that was included. That was meant to be inclusive. Okay? And I think that helps also when we all start shifting how we think about honoring an ethnic identity. Just because these children are white does not mean that they do not have ethnic identities and that they cannot be disconnected from these identities and experience the grief from that.
Not to derail here, but the reason I spoke up with my daughter's race and not her ethnicity is that I don't know if it's a closed adoption. So I don't know if you're going to address that at some point in the future with honoring, you know, how do we honor her ethnicity when I don't actually know what it is.
Yes.
You know, I have no idea right now. We've recently found some siblings, so I'm hoping that we can get some more information to help her build that ethnic identity as well as her racial identity.
Yeah. And I can touch on that a little now. As the helping professional, part of our jobs and responsibility is to help you learn the story, help the child learn their story. That means doing some background digging, maybe getting access to things that you, the parent, may not have direct access to, but being able to provide these children with as much information as possible so that they can construct their sense of self, their connection to their adoptive family with facts and not ponderings and wonderings, because what happens when they build things up, it tends to be inaccurate. So finding as much of a foundation as we can, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, and it's a process. And for some that have adopted out of foster care that may have moved and been in so many homes, that's part of the story as well, is helping them find that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm an adoptee, and I created the culture that I was raised in. So as being an adopted child in the family, I took on Polish culture, and that was my culture that I identify with. And then I've met my adoptive parents, and now it's kind of a whole thing trying to figure that out. But I'm definitely Polish. I was brought up Polish.
So integrating that.
Yeah, that lost kind of thing. That's all.
Can you repeat repeat that for those who couldn't hear?
I was adopted at 6 weeks, and I was raised by a Polish family, and I very strongly identify with that as my culture. But I've met my birth family, and now I've lost my parents, and I connected with my birth family, and now it's just this whole other dynamic.
So as we move through these next slides, we're going to look at the physical, emotional, behavioral, and neurological changes and manifestations of grief. And we're going to take this through developmental stages. So physically, we're looking at the stomach aches, the maybe physical representations of anxiety or depression, so headaches, diarrhea, sleep difficulties. Emotionally, so that separation anxiety that can occur, maybe some challenges or disconnect in the attachment between the child and the parents, the feelings of shame and guilt. We'll talk a little bit about death fantasy. Behaviorally, tending to regress. Some children, as they move through different stages and they re-experience the grief, they can regress back to other stages, both in their thinking and in their behaviors. So you may have a 10-year-old that might start engaging in the behaviors that you would see of a 3 or 4-year-old. And this is not only a sign that we need to readdress not only the story of adoption or the sense of grief, but slow down a little bit so that we can meet the child where they're at. And also neurologically, so disturbing of brain development and influencing critical periods, those periods where it's essential for children to be engaged in language or to be surrounded by other influences, and then the sensitive periods as well. So loss is inherent to adoption. We call these non-finite losses. These are slow losses that they tend to continue on, and the child never knows when the next shoe is going to drop, when the next loss is going to come, and so they stay in this stage of anticipating loss. Families' unpreparedness to accommodate the child's cultural identity, even to the extent of downplaying a cultural background in favor of their own, can lead to identity confusion, and of course this contributes to additional loss. So I think that does kind of connect with, is it Diane? Yes, with the example that you presented of maybe not knowing that cultural identity, assuming one cultural identity, and then meeting your first family and having that disconnect of, I don't identify with that, I don't know about that, right? So let's start with birth to toddler. As you can see, and can you guys see this in the back? Is this okay? Okay. So interest in the world, right? Emotions and interactions. This is when we start to develop our sensory motor systems and when we start attaching. These are developmental tasks and accomplishments for this stage. We also start to develop self-regulation. If we're experiencing problems in this stage and we're not learning how to self-regulate, we're going to experience problems at the stages further down the line as they get older. At this age, the way they conceptualize loss, all objects are alive. I think for those of us who have engaged with younger children, this is also the delightful stage. It's also the stage where if you hide your eyes and play peekaboo, they really think you're gone. And it's fun. So they also start to develop a mental representation of their caregiver. Understanding the lost here. So before 9 months, annihilation due to a loss of hidden regulators. Hidden regulators are the things that the child has encountered even in utero. So these are these are sounds, smells, feelings after they have been birthed, any encounterings that they would have. So for some that are able to, they talk about the importance of keeping anything that you can, the blankets, the hospital band, anything. Those are the things that help them with the self-regulation and also connect them to the reality. And we'll talk more about hidden regulators later. And hidden regulators can come from the adoptive family as well. For those who have adopted young, like 6 weeks or, those first year, the hidden regulators that help calm the child that can also be used at later stages of development. Memories are implicit, they are viscerally remembered, they're not explicit yet, there's no language to these memories, and yet they still influence the way a child behaves at the age of 10. Implicit memory has been shown to have a great effect on that. So, typical problems. They want to connect, but they're unsure. For those of you who may be with younger children, they may push away. But they do want to connect, so there are times where they'll cry because they need you, but then they push away. So that can be a problem indicating of loss. For some, it's been a glazed affect and the rocking. I've worked with a couple of parents engaged in international adoption that have experienced this. The rocking behaviors, the head banging, or the body slamming, where they just kind of slam into the side of the stroller constantly. So what we want to do, parents and helping professionals for parents, is slowly introduce yourself into their environment. And you can do this by putting your hand between the pillow or the wall or the stroller so that they're connecting with you, and they will start to associate you with relief, right? Because that is the self-soothing that they're engaging in. So what we want to do to promote attachment and to promote wellness is have you be connected with wellness, connected with that self-soothing. And for those that have older children, if they're engaging in body throwing, holding or finding a way that you can engage your body with that, not only to protect them, but then again to start associating you with that regulation. Other problems are poor self-regulation and sometimes a delay in milestone achievement.
Sorry, can you touch back what you said about in utero? You touched on it really quickly, but... was that
So sounds that there are, trying to think of some of the pre and the pregnancy things that I've read. This is not my area of expertise. What was that, Diane?
The mother's voice.
The mother's voice. So the sounds, music. I was going for mother's voice, but I was also going for music and movement as well. I have a friend that's in a dance and movement therapist that has worked with some pregnant women about that, and like the movement of your body to help soothe the baby and things, and that they take this. So that's the part, the in utero thing.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see here. So yes, music, art, literature can help begin therapy and use more cognitive approaches later as the child begins to develop language and able to understand concepts. Then we move towards more cognitive things. At this stage, you can do art, you can have music, you can have movement that can help. So how do we help? Right? We want to identify those hidden regulators. If there was a stuffed animal, a scent, a food, music, anything that was used when they were younger, you want to incorporate those again. We want to revisit that and create that safe space. We provide a protective, comfortable, safe environment, regulate the intensity of stimuli. Sometimes, because they've experienced a dysregulation during their sensory motor stage, then external stimuli can be misprocessed. Like it just doesn't, it can contribute to dysregulation. So just being aware of that and lowering the stimuli. Support the child emotionally. You want to gaze at them empathetically. There have been some times where I've worked with parents that are concerned about over-empathizing with the baby or trying to connect, and I want to dispel that right now. You want to maintain eye contact with your child. They exist within your eyes. If you don't, they no longer exist for them, their experience. So connect with them, meet them where they're at, display empathy, model empathy during these stages when they're dysregulated, when they're crying, and even if their eyes are closed and they're kicking and moving, attempt to maintain the eye contact and stay present in that moment with them. If you have pictures of biological family members or previous caregivers for those who may be adopting out of foster care, then having that available to the child. And simple games. you know, anything that can help as they're moving through that stage of dysregulation. We also want to incorporate the self-soothing, so like I said before, about gradually participating so that they start to connect you with that. Avoid prolonged separations during this time. Create a family story box. This can be fun. I've worked with a lot of families that have been so creative of different ways to just collect memorabilia and have a generative story of the family. And they go and keep it throughout the stages so that at different points in the life when the child becomes curious or wants to know, like, where did you get me from again? Or what did I look like back then? What were you doing? You can pull out this box and you can start to ground those memories into their explicit memory, because now they have language. They can ask the questions. They can't during this toddler stage and pre-tot, but they can later. So this is something that you can continue throughout the lifespan. Celebrate the child's heritage.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So is this about, can it also include the life that grows from the present family, or are you really referring to the prior to adoption?
It's a both and. It's a both and. There are some adoptive families that have no information about the first family. And so their start of their box, their start of their family is really now. But there are others that might have connections, even if it's just a location, and they can collect things from that location and have that as the box of, like, what I do know about your first family is that you're all from California, and I don't know about your parents, but I do know that they lived in Northern California, and here are some things that you can find in Northern California, and talk about that. Or when we got you, we traveled to Northern California, and here's a rock I picked up on the road or on the beach, and I thought of you. So again, showing that this is going to help with attachment, it's going to help with joining and creating that story. We want them to have a very real story that is based in reality and not the ghost kingdom.
And also, that experience doesn't have to be directly involving the family. They can do it on their own.
Mm-hmm. As they get older, yes. Yes. So also books about adoption, and some that I'll offer at the end. So toddler through early childhood, we're moving into ages 2 to 6. Here, developmental tasks, they're understanding cause and effect. They're starting to associate some things, okay? They learn to experience 2 emotions at the same time. Otherwise, emotions are just so big. They either love you or hate you. We can't do both. Those are 2 big emotions. Balance between conquering and becoming overcome. Fantasy play and that very rigid thinking. And these are the tasks of this age group. Loss in this age, objects are still alive. Explicit memory becomes available because now they have language. They recognize emotional ties. So now they know who they're connected with and can feel the loss of that connection when you're gone. And I'm not just saying, the birth families that have left them or their previous foster families. I mean, you, the parents. They can now really feel that loss when you leave for the weekend or you go away to work. So they're starting to connect with those emotional ties and equate them with loss. If we experience problems during this age, you tend to get a poor understanding of cause and effect, poor behavior management, so more dysregulation, difficulty accepting change. I don't know if anyone's experienced that, where maybe you've started your weekend and told the child, we're going to go to the park and then we're going to go meet your friends at a birthday party. And then the birthday party gets canceled. Like, you said we were going to the birthday party. And that just ruins their whole day. Like, you just... And so they become dysregulated. They have a really hard time being flexible and accepting this new change. A fragmented sense of self, so they don't associate themselves with the family that they're in, and they start to connect and associate with other people. So they don't have the capacity at this age to separate, classify, and organize their losses into the larger world. So this is why they acted out. And we don't know these things, but if we look back at that instance of a child that, for them, who needs security and safety and stability and a plan to help them feel safe and secure, and then the plan changes, well, they no longer feel safe. If we understand this and know this and we're the attuned observers, then we can better address how to do that. We can have some empathy and compassion, and we as the adults can take a step back and recognize, I'm dealing with a child that is going through a situation where they've experienced loss or permanency, and that's important. Stability is important for them, and I've just destabled their life, their day. So let's work on readdressing that. Resiliency, again, those hidden regulators come up again. We want to model appropriate ways for the child to express their feelings. A lot of times, this is where we start to separate feelings from behaviors, right? We honor their experience of the feeling. You can be angry, you can't kick your sister. You can be angry, but you can't curse at me, right? You can be sad. I feel sad too. When we're sad, that doesn't mean that we can cut up the wall, right? So we start to really separate and honor the feelings, but flesh out the behaviors. Providing memorializing opportunities, this kind of fits with the California example of traveling, but also as they move through a family, and this would be typical of any family, families that do annual pictures. Some families do Christmas and Easter, or maybe some families have holidays that they go on. Finding ways to memorialize that, whether it's through pictures or mementos, t-shirts or things like that, that again, when the child comes back, they can base and remember that. And you, the parents, can provide the story for that. It's all about them learning that story. Answer questions, be concise, sort of statements. Try not to go on because they're not going to retain that at this age. And they will ask you again. You're going to have another opportunity to do this. You will revisit this again and again at every developmental stage. And that creating opportunities to balance between fantasy and reality. So when they're visiting that ghost kingdom at this stage and wondering what their mom looks like, having that space for them to imagine and dream, but also to connect with you in reality and have a conversation about what that looks like. And if you don't know anything, then being transparent about that and joining them and say, I don't know what your first mom looks like, but I do wonder if she looked like you. You have such beautiful eyes. Or for the gender, your hair, I wonder if she had hair like you too. Maybe her hair is different than my hair. But finding ways to join them in that place and then also connect them with the very real reality that they're living now. Therapeutic play, exploring painful thoughts and feelings. They're not too young for this at 2 through 6. Sometimes we tend to place onto our children our own uncomfortableness in addressing topics. And that there's an age-appropriate way to discuss loss. There's an age-appropriate way to discuss longing and wanting and desiring that which they don't know. Pebble technique is something that you can just drop it's like a one-liner conversation, and it's a way to see if this is something that they're curious about, but maybe are afraid to ask. A pebble technique can be if they're asking you questions about their birth family and they say they have some sort of skill, maybe they're really good at drawing or they're really good at throwing a ball, and you can say that I wonder if your dad was really good at throwing a ball too and what he'd think about this. And that's it. You don't have to pursue it further. If they bite, then you've got a conversation. If not, you've created a space for them to talk about their first father. And for them to know that you're okay talking about their first father. Proper timeout. For those that are using time in versus time out, time in being that you're spending time with the child in an environment where the stimuli is reduced, like removing them from an environment and you're spending time with them, regulating them, and then talking to them about appropriate behaviors. Or if you're exercising time out, where you remove them and they sit and then they come back to you. Either way, correct times, right? Age-appropriate timeouts and what you're doing with that. And then another idea is the family storybook. And for one family, they crafted theirs with their they had twins, adopted twins with their 6-year-olds. And they had the 6-year-olds create the book, and the father bound it with twine. And they started pictures and stories. Like, they just wrote the date on it and said what they did for the day, and just started at that point creating their family storybook.
I wonder if you could mention the third thing about daily schedule, the consistency.
Yes. So that fits in with the child with the canceled birthday party, right? So we want to organize daily schedules so that they can be consistent and the child can predict their day. This is way of life. It's been very helpful if you are able to eat at a consistent time for dinner. For breakfasts, making sure that if they get breakfast in the morning at home, that they always get breakfast in the morning at home. If they get breakfast at school, then, that being a consistent thing as well. The more consistency that you can offer, the safer the environment feels, because it's predictable. And they know when the snack is coming. They know when they're leaving to go to a friend's, or like every Tuesday, you go to ballet, or every Tuesday you go to karate. Like this is what we do. This is also creating the identity of the family. In this family, we go to church on Sundays. It's Sunday. We're going to church. So being able to create that helps them ground in the reality and feel safe. I think, honestly, that translates to adults as well. I'd imagine a lot of you find safe and security in being able to predict your day, your financial situation, your health care. Right? Safety and predictability. Okay? General developmental tasks, moving on to ages 6 through 10. Peer group identification. This is where they're starting to create groups of friends. They realize that actions lead to reactions. This is where that consequence talk starts to come in, right? Well, no, you did this, so now this happens. Definite notions about fairness and propriety. Rules are big during this stage. Oh, I thought that was a hand. And they can negate an operation. They can now reverse thought, right, and switch it. These are all things that you can use as you're trying to help them cope when they encounter a problem during this stage. Now, loss is permanent. They're recognizing that. Life equals things that move by themselves, so no longer everything is alive. The chair is alive, table's alive, this ball is alive. Now they realize that things that move by themselves are alive. Death can be personified, boogeyman, start having nightmares. And mutilation anxiety. For some of them, this is the fear of getting hurt and having an anxiety around that. And that comes during this age. And if we start to experience problems from loss, there's some withdrawal there, inappropriate social actions and social engagement. For some, it can be acting older than in social situations, maybe a parentified child, the child that's starting to act like the parent for everybody, and some that can regress as well. Sleep difficulties, difficulty identifying what's bothering them. They can't name it, they don't know it yet. This is where we can help by giving them language for what they're feeling, or using our experience to give them language. When I'm confused because I've been at school all day, I start to think, maybe I'm tired. Is that what happens to you? Do you think maybe you're tired? Trying to help them create and link the feelings with the words and the experience, and that can help with them in trying to identify what's bothering them. Yes.
As far as sleep difficulties with adopted children,
Mhm.
we've actually been co-sleeping and started to try to transition into her own room. Do you have suggestions on letting her lead that, continuing to try to create a little separation that we're imposing as parents? Or do you think it's best for her to just let her lead that, and if she wants to sleep with us, sleep with us?
So
I know co-sleeping is a hot button.
I was about to say, I want to like go ahead and make that preamble that co-sleeping is a hot
It's a hot button.
topic.
You let her lead with co-sleeping, we can say that.
Yeah, and
It
so
wasn't our agenda.
what I would invite you to do is to start writing down and thinking about pros and cons. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the ultimate goal for, yeah. So if it's security, how can we move towards security? What other things can we incorporate for her to feel safe? How can we help her recognize that safety extends beyond my reach, mom, right? And that it can move to other places, secure environments.
So you feel like leading her away from co-sleeping as long as we're creating security is a good option for her?
I think that it's individually specific. I would caution against moving too quickly.
Okay.
And I also caution against moving too slowly and regressing back, right? If we're gonna make a decision to take away the sippy cup and the binky, parents, we cannot be wishy-washy here. Either we're moving from the sippy cup to the full cup, we're not going back and forth, we're taking the binky away, the binky fairy's coming to gift your binky to another child. Okay? You sit there, you have a conversation about the children in the world and how there are children who need binkies, and there's a child waiting somewhere for your binky. Okay? We can't talk about this child waiting for the binky and then take the binky away and then give it back because we want to sleep or because the child is crying, right? So whatever decision that you make, my recommendation for you is to be informed and purposeful about that decision and to follow the decision through. We end up creating difficulty when we become inconsistent. Because when we're inconsistent, then what? You're not predictable. You say this, but you do this. I can't trust you. See how that all just kind of trickles down?
Question?
Hi, could you go a little bit into mutilation anxiety? Those are strong words.
Yes. So for some, it's this fear of getting hurt to the extreme, right? I can't go on the skateboard because I'm gonna break my leg and my arm is gonna fall off, right? And there's also some that have a kind of quiet anxiety about getting hurt, and you may notice this in them shying away from activities. So they might remove themselves, right? All the other kids are over here playing and doing stuff, and maybe they kind of steadily stay away from.
Can I add on to that?
Yes.
I thought mutilation anxiety is hair pulling, picking, self-harm kinds of things. 'Cause I know I've experienced that in my child. Is there a place, or do you get to that later?
It can happen during the stage. I'm trying to remember if it's
Especially
here
nail biting.
or if it's the next stage. I think it's when we move into the 11s, like where the identity confusion starts to
The
happen.
nail biting is like way young.
Yes. Yes, that is true.
Yes.
So some of the problems, again, becoming argumentative is another one as well. This stage, Jungian, and that's Jungian with a J, Carl Jung, identified the ugly duckling theme. This is when they start to notice that they don't exactly fit in. You might find this with your children that don't match your skin color, or maybe don't match your hair texture or your hair, right? They start to see these differences as negative, and some of them will express desires. I want to look like you, right? And If this continues and it's not shared with an adult, it can again fester and create unnecessary stress, and then in later stages can really set the foundation for negative experiences of self-esteem, self-worth, cultural identity integration, a sense of self, and then moving into becoming an independent adult. So creating spaces to talk about differences in a way of enriching the family, differences that bring perspectives and, yeah, your hair is different than mine and that's okay. Your hair does this great thing, mine does this. Skin color, acknowledging that as well. And helping them, again, start to integrate that. Because when we leave them on their own, they go into these very negative spaces.
What's your thought on the importance of racial mirroring for kids this age?
So by racial mirroring,
Like them
yeah.
in day-to-day lives,
yes.
in your home, in your church, in your community, in your school.
So studies show that for transracial families and for integrated families, living in a community and providing environments where diversity and inclusion is present, that does promote healthy psychological well-being. It promotes higher feelings of self-esteem, greater academic success, being able to see others like you and connect with that helps, again, them ground into the reality of where they are. It's hard to ground if you can't identify with anybody in your environment. Is there another hand? I thought there was.
But I think there are also ways. I happen to have raised a transracial child in New Hampshire, and he really claimed in some ways, in a very positive way, his uniqueness, while also we so very actively fostered the reality of his racial identity so very early on. From the first time I changed him on the changing table, your beautiful brown skin, I love your hair, I mean just everything. In some ways we thought maybe we went overboard because he thought he was God's gift to the world.
And children are very egocentric, so of course.
Absolutely. But I think there are ways, even when you don't have as active models as we would have liked to have had. We tried, but it wasn't available on a daily basis, for the idea.
It also sounds like you acknowledged race in your home.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I went to the point where you get a Christmas ornament. In those days, 30 years ago, it was hard to find one with a brown face. So I painted them, brown and made sure they always had something that
Yes.
he could celebrate as, his, as I got something for his white sister. So, I mean, there's ways that we can do it. But anyway.
And ways that you saw to represent them in Christmas. So you painting the ornaments, you making sure that they see things, right?
Yeah.
So finding other ways for them to see and be included. If the sister gets a Christmas ornament, they get a Christmas ornament and they both look like them,
Right.
right? So for those who don't or aren't in environments or just location is what it is and it's just not a very diverse location, then finding other ways to integrate it, making race a safe topic in the home, that it's not something that we just don't talk about, right? And don't acknowledge, because when we do that, not only are we dishonoring their experience, we're invalidating their experience. They're not blind. They see that they're different. But then we're also creating that mistrust. How can I trust you later? Okay? So we need to perceive these children as legitimate mourners, right? And not disenfranchise them from their grief or discredit their grief or play it off as they're just acting out. They're just behaving poorly. Or for some, and I hope we will move past this, but they're bad children. And that we do not use that language with our children. Reading books together. Again, we're looking at resiliency recovery for ages 6 through 10. Recognizing feelings about this age often require a physical outlet because the child doesn't have the maturity to handle intense emotions, so that's why you'll see more acting out behaviors. So recognizing that. So with this part, I'd like to say that for the situation that created change here, the child has acted out in such a way that they are either no longer able to stay in your home or you have decided that you're no longer able to keep that child. So I would like you to take the piece of paper that I originally asked you to tear and pass it to your left. I'm sorry. Yes, to your left. Go back. Oh, okay, if you haven't received one, it's okay. We're gonna be passing around. If somebody is looking for someone to pass and would like to give it to somebody who hasn't received one, then go ahead and we can keep passing around. Do you have something to write with, ma'am? And again, make this yours. This piece is being given into your keeping to take care of, to keep safe, to provide for. How do you do that? How do you own it? Claim it. Write your name, draw a picture, write a word on the one that you just received. Yes.
Something different than we did previously?
Oh, okay, hold on. Can we do something different? Yes. And
What are we to do with them?
so the paper that you have in front of you is yours. So in some way, make an outward expression that it's yours. You can write,
Somebody else.
it's yours.
Now it's mine.
It's yours. Yeah. Even though it was somebody else's, it's now yours.
And we can do any other kind of expression.
Any other kind of expression. A lyric, a name, a picture, a design.
We don't have to change it. So how
No. You don't have to change it. And if you had a design that you used on the first piece and now you want to use a different design, that's perfectly fine. Ma'am, yes?
How do I get a piece back to me? I mean,
Oh, it's okay. If you don't have a piece for this round, we'll continue again. Okay? So, that's not going to be a good piece. But thank you. So, okay, we want to teach acceptable ways to express anger. Encourage emotional timeouts. Use deep breathing. Some have used different Tai Chi moves, calming aromas, stress balls. And if you are able to model this behavior for your child, even better. Show them and acknowledge within yourself as they're getting dysregulated and you're getting frustrated because we need to go to the store. I don't have time for you to be kicking and screaming on the floor right now. You find yourself becoming anxious and frustrated. Self-awareness and recognizing, like, you know what? Mommy needs to breathe too. Why don't we just let's take a minute and I'm gonna breathe with me. We've done dragon breathing with children. If you can connect with them and do the big intake and then blow out all the hot air like a dragon. Oh, look at all that fire. Blow all that fire out. So modeling it for yourself, meeting them where they are, and then teaching them how to regulate by using these emotional timeouts. Set rules around appropriate behaviors. This is where that whole rules of the developmental stage coming to your benefit, because rules are very important in this stage and fairness is very important. So you can help use that to set the stage for behaviors, for what's acceptable and what's not. Sleep problems, you want to stabilize sleep problems as quickly as possible, right? Bedtimes are important. If we're noticing that bedtime is at 7 and for some reason your child is still up and rolling around or trying to leave and it's 9 o'clock, we want to try to nip that as soon as possible. The more nights that go on with their bedtime being changed and being different, the more dysregulated they become. And it's harder to circle back. For some of the children, some parents will let their children stay up later when they recognize the child's having difficulty sleeping. So again, recognizing how to circle back. Sometimes we go a little too far and then before we know it, you've got a 10-year-old that's up at 1 o'clock and you don't know how to start getting them back to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock and they need to go to school. So recognizing, yes, you have a choice as your parent on how to parent your children, and just being aware of the shifts that you're making in their sleeping schedule. We want to get them regulated as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Have open conversations about how their birth parents might have felt about the loss. We've talked about that daydreaming, right? That it's normal for this to occur. We want to talk about it and bring it to the reality and talk about the thinking surrounding the loss. Help internationally and ethnically different child identify how to accept these differences. So finding ways to incorporate culture, birth culture extends beyond cooking a dish. It extends beyond reading the book. It's finding other ways that in the daily life of this child, both cultures are represented. So this falls also for Caucasian children as well. If you are able to find the birth culture and integrate that with the culture of your family, then again, studies have shown that these children have higher feelings of self-esteem, they're able to emotionally regulate, they perform better academically, you see a decrease in acting out behaviors, an increase in self-regulation. So any efforts that you can make to honor both and have them be represented and have the child engage with aspects of their birth culture in a daily living, then those are good. The providing opportunities to participate in cultural events. For some people travel back to the birth country. Some people attend folk festivals and folk fairs and things like that. Go ahead and partake in those opportunities and take it a step further and have conversations with your children and find out what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. Did they see themselves in anything there? You know, or what do you think if we started doing that? Like, what if we all started wearing different hairstyles or something, and seeing where they are and engaging them in the topic on it. It really is about incorporating not only the conversation, but creating that space for them to know that you are a safe person to talk to about this. They're not going to hurt your feelings. And if they are hurting your feelings, we can talk about that too. That's a different group. Okay. Early adolescence. So now we're moving into that 11 and 15. So distinct identities. This is where they're really trying to separate themselves from where the family is, and develop who they are. This period can also come with self-doubt. They experiment, 11 to 15, time to experiment, try some things out. And they begin to consider several concrete and abstract choices at the same time. So the abstract reasoning for conceptualizing loss, being versus non-being. So they start to move into that higher level thinking. It's not just about things that move or alive. And there are deficits in a risk perception. So not thinking about the risk inherent in their behaviors. Okay? So not realizing if I jump off this building, I might break my leg. So there can sometimes be deficits in the risk perception. When you're experiencing problems with this age, 11 to 15, there can be regression, right? A return to rigid thinking. Developmentally, 11 and 15-year-olds are moving towards more abstract thinking, right? They're able to handle different concepts, ambiguity. When you experience problems, they tend to regress back to rigid thinking. This is a ball. You're like, well, yes, it's a ball, but it's a football. No. Right, I've engaged that with some of them, that because the football is shaped differently, for them it's not a ball, that's not a ball. This is a ball. Well, this is a ball too, it's football. No, it's not. Difficulty regulating emotions, increased dependence on others, and the yearning for birth parents. And this can be connected with yearning to connect with someone who looks like them. And for their mind, they, in the ghost kingdom, have built up their first parents, their birth parents, to who they would like them to be. And they now want to connect and meet these people. So this is the age where that can start to develop as well. So both adoptive parents and society want to minimize the loss, and expect adoptees to be grateful and not grieving. This can create situations within the family that lead to a disconnect and a dishonoring of the experience and the integration of the family. So for now, in this instance, there has been such a disconnect within your home. There's also been a disconnect within the care system. So I'd like you to take your pieces that you have and move them to the left.
We need one brought over here. Does anybody not?
Is there anyone who hasn't participated and needs a piece?
I don't.
And go ahead and claim this piece as well. Didn't get a piece back. Yes.
On the previous slide, you had something, deficits and risk perception. Is that comes up just in that period?
No, not just in that period. It can be typical in this period, but it can extend beyond.
What about previous? Developmentally, when do children start to, or is it new to this period? It sounds like something that there would be a deficit at a younger child also.
And it can be. That, we were looking at how they're conceptualizing loss throughout this period. So it can happen, so the experience of the deficit between the risk can happen at a younger age, but that's also part of magical thinking at a younger age. You know, magical thinking is I can jump off this couch and I can fly. So it's not so much I can jump off this risk and off this couch and I'm not equating that there's a deficit or a difference between the risk perception. I'm not really gonna get hurt, right? That's a different level of thinking. So any behaviors, from my understanding, any behaviors that could happen earlier while they are similar to the behaviors that happen during this stage are originating from a different place of thought. And typically for the younger children, it's magical thinking. Okay, so resilience and recovery for 11 through 15. Increased structure in the environment. Sometimes this can be difficult, and sometimes your teens are going to rail against this. They are going to scream and shout against this. What have we learned? We have learned that structure and consistency promotes and provides safety and security. The more they can trust you in their environment, the better they are able to regulate and the better they are able to address not only the problems of loss, but any other problems that may be going on in their life during this stage. So trying to remain as consistent as possible. The limit the homework is really pick your battles, okay? Try to promote some empathy and compassion. When you're struggling with things, how do you feel like doing homework? Do you feel like doing work, finishing that paperwork or doing things? And for some of us, yes, this has to get done. I have to put this aside and I have to do this for now. And then also giving space for when it's not necessary. Are there options? Is there a space for you to create a time for your child where the homework can be done in this space, and then when it's not, we're moving away from that space? And this is during times of difficulty when they are really dysregulated, when they're struggling and having a hard time, and you are recognizing that your child is emotionally struggling, that having that argument about homework may not be the best thing right now. Provide opportunity to talk with non-family members about grief and loss. So that slide before about feelings of gratitude, and that while you may not say this to your child, you know, children learn more from what's caught than what's taught, right? And you, as an adoptive family, are residing in a society where some people, consciously or unconsciously, well-intended or not, can say things that substantiate or support that feeling of gratefulness. Like, oh, you should be so thankful to your parents for saving your life. or them being present when other people come up to you and say, you've done such a wonderful thing adopting this child. You really have saved them.
This is also an age when I think peer relationships become so important, you know,
Mhm.
friends. And sometimes conversations can be opened with, do you ever have questions about, us because, you're different? You know, not saying in that way,
Mhm.
but what do your friends have to say about this? Do they ask questions about your adoption or what? And so that opens another good conversation.
Mhm.
Because their friends mean often more than what we have to say about, things.
Yeah. Peer groups, interactions, conversations are happening in the world
Right.
that can help support that. There was an instance working with a family when they were shopping and they knew this family out like in a different environment. So it's not like they were strangers, but they did come up when the child was present and say, you know what? My cousin is thinking about adopting and I'm just wondering, how much did she cost? And it, and all of you that are like, oh God, oh. Right? And when she came to me, she's like, I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know what to say. And then the child was looking to them like,
What's your answer?
oh, what you gonna say? Right? So not a situation that the parent predicted or even thought about. It did lead to conversations later about cost within the home. And the child started to personalize it. That because they were expensive, there was also a birth child in the home, a biological child in the home. So they started to separate and be like, I'm a burden. You had to pay for me. Right? So having conversations, not just in the moment, but then afterwards. Like, how did that comment, how did that experience shape how the child is defining their sense of worth and how the child is defining their identity and their place within the family, right? Woman probably didn't mean it, was just like,
Parent could say, she's priceless.
right?
Don't you know it is?
Yes.
A question that, from when they were much younger, that it would often just stop me up short is, and it's a little more subtle, but people saying, where did you get him?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
that's another one. Where did you get him?
Oh, yeah, right.
hmm
Yeah.
You know what they're.
Do I look like Angelina Jolie?
And for some, depending upon their location, there's a sentiment and a meaning behind that that's not as coarse of the word, like where did you come from? They're probably trying to ask, where did you adopt from, or like how did you?
Right, it wasn't ill-intentioned, but I always
Yep.
felt it had a bad effect.
Yep. And for most cases, they're not ill-intentioned. They're just uninformed. It's the same thing for any of you that have tried to connect with helping professionals, counselors, therapists, DBT people, for dialectical behavioral therapy, your school counselors, that for some that are not connected with the adoptive population and they just don't know. And they can say things like, oh, you're just like a real mom. No, you are a real mom. You're not just like one, right? And it's again, not ill-intended, but it communicates a separation of a feeling. And it really does a dishonor to the fostering and adoptive population. Read books, fiction books. Again, we're going back to the whole resiliency and recovery. And books that describe different types of loss so that they can start to integrate and process their own loss. Encourage journaling, letter writing, making activities. Revisit these family books that you may have started when they were younger and continue that story. Again, the hidden regulators, they come back. Just because they're in that 11 to 15 age group, if they're experiencing sleeping difficulties, eating difficulties, or if even some are regressing back to where they're having difficulties controlling their bowels and their bladders, if you have that blanket from when they were 2 years old, let's go ahead and bring that back and bring it into the bedroom, okay? So hidden regulators, scents, if there were candles that you used to burn when they were younger that helped relieve their stress or calm them down, reintegrate these things even at this age so that they can start working on controlling themselves and learn how to self-regulate. Yes, you had a question?
Yes, the situation where you have information that is unpleasant about either how the child was conceived or what they went through, initially, with the birth parent. Does that information do you transfer that information to the child, or, in other words, the story is kind of, I don't really know how to explain the story necessarily, because it contains some unpleasant aspects.
So she was saying that sometimes the original story from the birth parents or the first parents may be unpleasant or difficult to explain and convey to the child. So this can happen for some, I'm thinking specifically of a family that we worked with where the mother was addicted to drugs and the child was then placed up for adoption, moving through, right? I encountered this family when the child was 6, and the parents were in the stage of wanting to talk to them about their first family, right? Because the father was in jail, rights were terminated, parental rights were terminated while he was in jail. And so that's got some negative history with that, right? So finding a way to talk about that with the child that is age appropriate and acknowledging the situation. With this family, they had decided on working on the story before the adoption. I helped with figuring out the location of the mom, the hospital, location of dad in the jail. And working with this family, it was telling them how mom was sick. She had a really hard time and she was sick. And then talking with dad, that dad made poor choices. And because of dad's poor choices, he wasn't able to be with you. They then took that further to talk about the other people in their lives. They incorporated the judge, the lawyers, the family reunification team that was working with the parents to attempt to get mom able to take care of the child, but she was not able to make that commitment. So they found a way to incorporate the other characters and talk about how they were helping and working with the mom, and everybody's focused on you and wanting to take care of you. And as they moved through, then they talked about the adoption story and then the family. So they found age-appropriate things to talk about, and they incorporated the other people that the child was connected to that they may not have the language to remember, but implicit memory is there. So they worked through that, and then they built on that. I only worked with them for a year, but then they built on that as they were continuing to go through, and they went back, right? Even though they did this once, you've got the process of developing and creating it, and then you read it when it's done, you revisit it, and you go back, because the child will have different questions. Yes?
I was thinking of implicit memories if it was traumatic for the child, and they have obviously no visual or any kind of memory of it except that implicit memory. And that creates a whole different story, and one that's difficult to tell to any child. So do you have any thoughts about that?
So the question is about traumatizing implicit memories and the story that could be difficult to convey to the child. So we acknowledge age appropriateness in addition to staying as close to the truth as possible. The truth is the best. When we integrate lies, we create situations when the child becomes older and they either start engaging in the search themselves, or a family secret comes out. Mom and dad have told you this, but Uncle Joe over here, he knew what really went down. And Uncle Joe tells you, right? And it goes against what mom and dad said, that it really just creates more situations of mistrust. And typically, a lot of adoptive and fostering children have problems with trust and building secure attachments. So we want to do things that are not going to inhibit your child from securely attaching to you, right? So the age appropriateness is typically worked out with a professional and the family. Again, there are some families have specific family values and family practices around information and what a child should be aware of. And so, as a helping professional, it's honoring where the family's at and how they want to parent their child, and also creating opportunities to integrate change opportunities, like change experiences for that. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but what I'm hoping you're getting from that is that it's about collaboratively addressing, honoring the truth, and making sure that the child has an opportunity to readdress and come back to you with questions about that truth. Yes?
In case
Oh.
of, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the child is living the consequences of that trauma anyway.
Correct.
And they're holding it in their body.
Mhm.
Correct.
So it's usually a relief to have some
Mhm.
things to go on.
To know, right? And to feel validated and not think you're crazy.
And in my case, I always said you're a survivor.
Mhm.
Strong. It's a way to honor what you learn and become wise because of stuff that you've gone through.
Because it's, as you said, it's implicit. It's already a part of what they are. If you deny the experience, you're denying a part of what they are. It's the same with ethnic and cultural identity. If you deny culture in your home, if you deny ethnic identity, if you deny the things that make your child different, you're denying who they are. So middle to adolescence, right? Increased awareness of strengths and weaknesses. They start to question morals, really trying to define that identity again. They practice intimacy through platonic relationships. And there's a greater awareness of self. These are some of the developmental tasks. Conceptualizing loss, there's still that abstract reasoning. We're still on track to develop abstract reasoning on being versus non-being. Problems during this stage from loss would be judgment and reasoning difficulties, so maybe making more poor choices, not being able to fully think out decisions, which you'll find with some parents are like, what were you thinking? Did you think this through? They can regress, right? We're in the 15 to 17 age, but you can find children that will start to regress and engage in behaviors that you would find in a younger child. The pseudo-adult behaviors, so that kind of parentified child, once again, they're acting like mini adults and they're 15 and 17. And that can be an attempt to take control of their environment. If their environment is out of control and chaotic, they can't depend on anything, there's no consistency, then some of them will take on that role and find a way to establish stability. And it may not be in the way that you like, but for them, it is reinforcing safety and security. Mimicking internal image of birth parents. So you might find as they're through this identity stage, they're thinking like, this is how my father would act, so I'm gonna act this way. Or this is what my mother would do, so I'm gonna start behaving that way. And these are the fathers and the mothers from the ghost kingdom that they have not met, but that they have built up in their mind on what they look like. So feelings are not based in logic. I think we can all agree on that, right? But they're founded in life's experiences and trauma, okay? So we want to acknowledge and honor that as we're moving through. It may not make sense, but this is what it is. Moving towards help. So recognize the loss, monitor sleep patterns and high-risk behaviors. It's easier to monitor high-risk behaviors when you've laid the foundation to be a person who can listen to your child and that you are a safe person for them to go to. Integrate those hidden regulators again. Promote stress inoculation, so finding ways to build up their resiliency and their ability to withstand stressful situations. And again, supporting the development of that cultural identity by honoring the child's origins, ethnic origins, and having very open conversations about that. So late adolescence, This is the 17 to mid-20s. At this stage, you're looking at vocational plans, expressing social and intimate relationships, develops and accomplishes goals independently. This is that stage where a lot of us are hoping we have done what we needed to set our children off so they have a better chance of being self-fulfilling, individualized adults that are moving out into the world. Highly dependent on previous lived experiences and development of self. So for this, it is what I know to be true. And you'll start to see even more so the child's beliefs about the world. So if for their whole life, their belief about the world is that the world is not safe, people are not to be trusted, then you're going to start really seeing this in how they engage with others during this time. Typical problems, academic disruption, they tend to be in that academic stage, moving into tech schools or colleges. Continuation of risk behaviors, sometimes female pregnancy as a way to compensate. I would never give my child up, right? My mom gave me up, but I would never do that to my child. So sometimes they will seek the pregnancy. Moving away from your family can trigger an additional loss. So again, readdressing all of these things, it's not the loss of a birth family, it is not the loss of a family connection. However, it is the loss of what you knew and what you have established to be, your normal. You're living at home with your parents, we have family engagements, now you're moving away to school. That's going to be a completely different thing. So the loss of what you knew. Unresolved loss can prevent the person from having intimate relationships. And we know this from attachments and how attachments work from the very beginning, moving on throughout adult life. So on the journey of healing, the child is fragile, right? And needs consistency, wisdom, and love to recapture feeling safe and grow into a whole and stable adult. We want to recognize that as we take these children into our hearts and into our families, that this is a lifelong process of readdressing that primal wound, because it comes up at every developmental stage. And we want to handle with care. Know that our children are developing differently, not worse than, just differently than other children. How do we help? We support future endeavors. We support the search. And if the family's struggling with this, then seek out support groups, seek out help from adoption competent counselors, from your adoptive community on how others have gone through that situation where your child comes to you and is like, I want to find my birth parents, I want to hire a private detective, I want to put my name on the national website and start to find these people. So being there for those conversations and being prepared to help support them in that. Promote a deeper, comprehensive understanding by examining loss from different perspectives. I put William Glaser in there for the with freedom comes responsibility. So being able to impart that to our children as they move on and they take the responsibility for their story. Encourage opportunities for refueling and catching up. Sometimes because they have experienced a loss of moving away, that they can just move away and be done. They probably don't miss me anyway. I don't need to call. I don't have to go home for the holiday. They're probably glad that I'm gone. I'll just stay here. Like re-encouraging and really promoting reconnecting with your children and creating opportunities for that, letting them know that just because you have left this home, you have not left this family, and it is important for you to be here. I also want to honor if you want to spend the holidays with your friends. So maybe you spend this holiday, Thanksgiving with your friends, and come home for Christmas. Right? So negotiating that and helping them balance their integration of self and who they're becoming, but also the family connection as well. Because for some of them, they don't know how to keep that balance. So here's some resources, some books. Colors of Grief is a really great one that offers even more experiences on how to help with the search and throughout the lifespan, some activities, and I think there's even some recipes in that book, if I recall. Primal Wound, always a great one. Highly recommend this book for everyone. Adoption Therapy, this one can be read by parents. It's also really helpful for helping professionals working with the adoptive population. Outsiders Within. This is writings on transracial adoption. Lost Daughters. Adoptees writing their experiences. Making Families Through Adoption. Again, helpful for families and parents, but also really helpful for helping professionals. And so if we take this and we think of this concept of loss and how we address it, then I feel that this really represents it. This whole, if a tablespoon of salt is added to a cup of water, it tastes less salty. If the tablespoon of salt is added to a jug of water, it tastes less salty. So if the salt is added to a pond, the taste is further dissipated. So if we're addressing loss in small parts and creating these safe environments, then the child is better able to accommodate and adjust and adapt as it encounters more loss, because they will. We all encounter loss. Any questions?
Do you have recommendations for adoption confidence therapists in this area or in Pioneer Valley?
I do not, but I think I can connect you with someone who does.
Do you have anything to say about open adoptions where the child knows their birth parents or has met them throughout their time of growing up?
So I'm falling back on what I know of the research with that, and that there's an integration and a balance between the families. And I think that for some they do it very well and for some it's not. But having that consistent link has been helpful, and that the integration of boundaries is also something that has been helpful in trying to regulate not only the core family, but maintaining the adoptions to the first family as well, or the connections to the first family as well. So some opt for the open adoption, some decide not to engage in open adoption, or there are some that decide to engage in international adoption thinking that they won't have to deal with the first family. And I think what we all know now after this training is that the ghosts follow the child. There is no avoiding the biological family, the first family, the birth family. This child will still have imaginings and wonderings and ponderings of what if. Who could I have been if I had stayed with my birth parents? So those ghosts travel. They travel from across the world to here, across states, across county lines.